So we're going to look again at the events of Genesis 13. And let me just take a moment to pray. Lord, I pray that you would help us to learn from your word and from the examples you set before us. Guide us in truth and in knowledge of you and your ways. For your name's sake, amen. So we're going to look at Genesis 13 now. Some of you have been in the other two talks about the life of Abraham, so I'm going to be interactive for a moment and ask who remembers anything about any of them. Anybody remember anything about Abraham that's worth remembering before we go into chapter 13? Feel free to speak, everybody knows you.
He wasn't perfect.
He was far from perfect. Anything else about him? Yeah. Right. Yeah, he was. We haven't come to that yet then, but you're ahead of the game. It's good to be ahead of the game. No, it's good to be ahead. Anybody else remember anything important about him up to the point that he was kicked out of Egypt? For those of you who weren't here, quickly, brought up in a house, in a city of moon worshippers, godless people. God called him. He answered the call, but not entirely. Tried to do things on his own terms. Went eventually to where God had told him to go. When he got there was a famine. Didn't check with God. Tried to sort it out himself. Went back to another city, familiar cities, familiar places. Went down there, deceived Pharaoh about who his wife was, lost his wife temporarily. They make films out of things like this, don't they? Lost his wife temporarily, God intervened. Pharaoh found out that he'd lied and deceived him, kicked him out. But when he kicked him out, he let him keep all the riches that he'd given him for Sarah, his wife, who was actually his half-sister, and all of that. So here, he hasn't really changed much, as you say. He's far from perfect. He's never perfect anyway, but we see in the life of Abraham someone who did change and became a faith giant. The first person we call the friend of God in the Bible. The person who is our model for faith. And yet, all these mistakes that he was making. The big mistake he made was self-reliance. Always trying to sort out his problems. He was a clever man, I'm sure of that. He was, he's an intelligent man. He was a capable man. But he wasn't capable of dealing with his life. And that can be true of us. We do the things we think are right. We put the blocks of wood under the bricks. And we don't see and think about the consequences. And he gained from this. But that gain brought an interesting change to his life. So, he kept that great wealth. But this story of Abraham, as we said before, is the change in the tone of the Bible. Genesis, up until this point, had all been about big events. And with a little intervention by certain people and certain things. Cain, Abel, Noah. But not much about them, really. But it changes now to being about a person and his family, and much more about them than the events around them. But chapter 13 mainly deals with a parting between Abraham and Lot. Now, Lot has been his nephew, his brother's son, and he'd spent years shadowing Abraham, following Abraham around, being where Abraham was. And that wasn't a bad thing. And not everybody agrees with this, but surely the call of Abraham to leave his family included everybody, and that would surely have included Lot. It seems a bit harsh, and I've already mentioned that, the harshness of it. But we also saw in the first look at Abraham's life, the negative influence that our family and friends can have on us. That true meaning of being unequally yoked, of the influence of our friends on us, the influence that draws us away quite often from God and the ways of God. Well, not everybody agrees with that, but I think it can easily be read into the call that he had. And that makes the parting that came kind of ironic. Because this wasn't Abraham saying to Lot, I've got to leave the city, I've got to leave Haran, I've got to go to this wilderness, I've got to see God at the stars in the openness, I've got to rely on him every day for food and water, and my shelter is a tent, because he's making me a pilgrim and a journeyer on this earth. He's not giving me a fixed space. He's not giving me a fixed home. Nothing like that to worry about. There are plenty of other worries. No, it came like in the weirdest way. It started, the separation started with a blessing. And God, in the Bible, clearly either brings things to pass or he allows things to pass. And that can vary. And blessings can test people as much as suffering in spiritual terms. So they both had gained from the riches that God had given to Abraham, because God, remember, is nation building here. He is creating wealth with Abraham that is later on going to go and allow his grandson to have a rich coat of many colours. That wealth that came and the blessing that came from God also brought blessing to Lot, and you can sometimes see that where God has blessed people, other people who are near them take part of that blessing. And sometimes God, as I said, causes things to happen. He allows things to happen. He allowed Abraham to make that foolish choice, the wrong-headed thought of having a refuge in Egypt, and only intervened when there was a serious chance that he could lose Sarah altogether. And he forced him out of Egypt through his intervention with Pharaoh. And then Pharaoh, a godless man, scolds the godly man of faith for being a deceiver and doing the wrong thing. And it may be sometimes in our lives, we as Christians fail, and it takes a non-Christian, somebody who doesn't know God, doesn't care about God, doesn't follow God, to point out where we've gone wrong. And you may or may not have had that experience, but I've certainly seen that. People outside the church reminding us what we should be doing. And that's what Pharaoh did with Abraham. So off they went, and we've already seen how the cities and the wilderness represent in many senses the ways of man and the way of God. And Abraham, as I said, needed to be in the wilderness to find God, because those all too familiar cities could keep him busy for years and keep him away off task. So Abraham went back to the Negev desert. He went back to a place called Bethel, where he built an altar to worship God, and he called on the name of the Lord there. And it's worth noting how in the wilderness Abraham habitually built altars. And we should perhaps reflect what that altar meant. What did it mean? It was two things, I think. One was that he was marking his obedience and his faithfulness to God to those around him. The people who saw him build that altar, who saw that altar, saw a man saying, "This is where I stand to worship my God. This is my physical sign of following God." And it was a testimony. It was a witness. We're coming, God willing, to do communion. Communion is, in a sense, our altar. This is the place we come to meet God and to show people that we are God's followers and that we are God's family when we follow God together. And there are many types of altars in the Christian life. And this, of course, was a physical altar that he built. An unashamed place, a virtual temple. He didn't need to go to a great temple to meet God. He didn't need to build an altar, but he did it as part of his obedience and his faithfulness and his telling other people around him and with him, "This is the God I serve." So here they come, Lot and Abraham with their great wealth. Now at the time, wealth certainly could be represented as it is now by gold and silver. But one of the main ways that people of the nomadic type that Abraham was coming to be held wealth was how? How did they typically hold and show their wealth? This is the risk of being interactive.
The amount of animals they...
Exactly, the animals they had. Now, how many of you have got 100 sheep? How many of you have got a dozen cattle or 1,000 cattle? Anybody? Anybody got a goat? Liz used to have to look after goats. She hated them. And they hated her. They were like snakes, Matthew. Yeah. Anyway, so I don't know how wealth is measured in snakes. Is that like 5 snakes? And it's probably like a fortune in snake land. But that's how they measured their wealth. Now, there's a problem with cattle in the desert, isn't there? There's limited grazing and there's limited water supply. So if you've got enormous flocks, and there's 2 of you with your own households and flocks, there's potential for problem. And that's exactly what happened. And we see in verse 7 of chapter 13, I'm going to read it, you can check that out for yourself, because hopefully you are following this. Arguments began between the servants. So it wasn't Lot and Abraham, it was the people working for them. And they were literally fighting over who got there first, who had to have this, who was going to get out of the way for them to do it. And there's all this conflict going on. Now there's no record of how Lot responded to that. There's no record of Lot saying, well, Abraham, you know, I've been following you now all my life. You've been good to me. I wouldn't have what I had if it wasn't for you. So yeah, you have it first. No, he didn't do anything. Stayed silent as far as you can tell. But Abraham shows the beginning of why God called him, I think, by saying to Lot, you know, there's this tension between us. And so he seats him out and he says, there's this tension between us, there's this conflict between us. I don't want this to go on. Because Abraham, by this stage, wasn't just thinking of Lot as his nephew, he was thinking of him as his brother. There was a closeness. He was part of his brethren. He couldn't get much closer in human terms. And so he suggests that they separate. That's in verse 9. And he also tells Lot he can choose where he wants to live. Now there's a choice here. There's another moment of choice for Lot, isn't there? Does he say, well, let's merge the flocks. Let's carry on living together. Let's carry on being brethren. Yes, I am your brethren. All these years, perhaps Abraham should have said to Lot, goodbye Lot, I've got to go and seek and worship God. I wish you well, you have this, have that, whatever. Because we all separate from people at different times. But the tragedy of the separation is it has come through wealth, and it's come from Abraham, it's come from Lot choosing that wealth over his relationship with Abraham. So there's a lesson in life there, and there are many people you know and I know, who families or loved ones who fall out over money. And they seem as close can be, and then there's an argument over a will, there's an argument over who had this teapot from Adalis, there's an argument over who gets the dog, you know, whatever it is. People are much more fickle than we like to think they are. And we speak quite often of love and brotherhood and caring for other people, but when our own self-interest come in, it sadly doesn't take long for that to ditch. Let me tell you a brief story from my family. I'm not going to go off now about water levels, okay? If I do, somebody poke me with a stick. My family had strong links with London. They'd gone to be drovers and merchants in London in the early 19th century. And one of them had gone back to live in London, and they had property there. If you know London, they were on the north bank of the Thames, not very far from St Paul's Mansion, the monument for the fire of London. So they were right in the heart of London. So whatever property he had then would be like, you know, go and live with Richard Branson territory now. Except people, I guess, never had that kind of property. It was always bought up by other people. So in the end of the 19th century, my great-great-uncle died. And his wife didn't get on with my great-great-grandfather, although he had an interest in the property. I think he lent him money to buy it. There was a long-raging argument between the brother and the sister-in-law for years. And in that period, my grandfather was sent to stay with his auntie. And he was quite young, and she took him out into the centre of one of the bustles of East End or wherever she took him, and she left him there. And it changed his life. It was one of the most terrifying things that happened to him. And his belief, and the belief of the family, was that she did it deliberately. Because to be a young child like him on the streets of London, a lot of them didn't last too long. And the belief was that she was trying to do that to hit back at my grandfather over money. And there are much worse things that families do to one another. Families do to one another over money. And this, as I said, is a case where Lot makes that choice between wealth and stay with Abraham, and he chose wealth. And Abraham gave him the choice of where to go, and instead of him saying to Abraham, well, Abraham, you are, as I said, the person who's helped and comforted me. You have the best grace in mind. You have the valley of the Jordan. You have the richest pasture and the best water supply, because that was a key thing for them at the time. You have that. That's important to us. But no, his selfishness was at the core of his choice, as it often is with others, if we're honest. And he chose an area near a little place, a little busy place, called Sodom and Gomorrah, which you may already know, and which hopefully we're going to see later, how that choice went. That was definitely a piece of wood in the bottom of the brick line for Lot. And yet, the irony is there, isn't it? We saw that call to Abraham, his need to anticipate what Jesus said to the disciples, to choose him before family. We see how, as we've seen already, how being a follower of Jesus can bring tension within families and pressure within family. We see Lot effectively ditching Abraham for what he had and what he thought he would get. And whichever way we look at it, we need to look at this and see this as a very important step on Abraham's personal journey, because he really was alone in that sense now. But Lot's choice is an interesting one. And the way that the Bible puts it is quite interesting, because when Abraham gives him the choice, we read in verse 10, and Lot lifted up his eyes. That's in the ESV. Now, does that phrase remind you of another scriptural phrase? Lot lifted up his eyes, and he was looking for what he could get. He was looking for what this earth had to offer. Now, one of the best known psalms, the Psalm of Ascent, is Psalm 121, verses 1 to 2. I lift up my eyes to the hills, yes. From where does my help come? My help comes from the Lord, who makes heaven and earth. Lot should have been looking to the Lord, not to the pasture land. Lot should have been looking to what God could have had planned for him, not what he could get. So whatever form that may take for you and for me, because I know it takes a form in me, and I'm assuming that it takes some form and outlet in you. Whatever form that takes, maybe we need to stop sometimes before we make choices and say, what does the Lord want me to do? Not what we believe is in our best interest. Because Lot's choice was never in the end in his best interest. Far from it, as I said. He lost far more going to Sodom and Gomorrah, to those attractive pasture lands, than he would have gained if he'd stayed in the Negev. That he would have lost, rather, if he'd stayed in the Negev. And it was a terrible decision with awful consequences. But we need to keep the hope that the Bible always gives us in these situations. Even in his bad decision, there was a process where God was working in Lot. And we're not going to look in detail with that now, but for the comfort of knowing that even in his terrible decision, his selfish decision, God was still there and working in him with his weaknesses, with his immaturity, despite his selfishness, despite his foolishness. God loved Lot and brought him eventually, after a terrible sequence of events, brought into a better place. And we know that because the Apostle Peter tells us that in 2 Peter 2 verse 7. And he says this, if he rescued Lot, a righteous man who was distressed by the depraved conduct of his lawlessness, so he can save anybody. And Peter didn't say that, I added that. So here's Lot, a righteous man who was distressed. There are Christians in this world who made those bad decisions, and one or more of you may be those Christians, and you made bad decisions, and you know now that they're bad decisions. There is hope for us, there is hope for you, because God is still there to forgive, and you may be overwhelmed by the place that you've moved to. You may be unable to get out of the mess that you're into, as Lot was in the end. Trapped in Sodom and Gomorrah in effect. But God is still doing the work. God is still going to rescue you. Your eternal future is secure, even if you made bad choices in this life and in this world. So off Lot goes to seek happiness, which he doesn't get. Sorry to clue there at the front there. And then Abraham's on his own, and God gives him this tremendous promise, which is, I would think at this time, given partly as a comfort to Abraham. It was easy for Abraham to lose Lot. Because he loved Lot. He wanted the best for Lot. And Lot has effectively gone off and left him, after all the faithfulness he showed to him. But Abraham here is reminded by God, I'm going to give you all this land. Look every direction. This is going to be your land, and those are the land of your descendants. And not just that, that you're going to have so many descendants that you can't count them. More than the grains of the sand and the bits and pieces of the earth around you. And he gives this promise to Abraham, and he gives him that covenant. What does Abraham do? He builds another altar. He marks another place to say, I'm here, God's here, God's called me, I'm following God, I'm God's man, this is where I stand. And we need to do that. And whatever's going on around us, and it is a terribly dark time, for a lot of us as individuals, for us as a country, it's been going on for years, but it's getting worse. The pressures on us aren't going to stop, though. Pressures on us as Christians, whether we're like Lot, trapped in Sodom, and unable to feel the need and the ability to act against what's happening around us, which is the impression you get from Peter, or whether we're out on our own in some sense like Abraham, just putting our markers down and isolated, because that can be true of Christians in every situation, can't it? Whatever our situation, God doesn't change. His promises don't change. His comforts don't change. What changes is those barriers that come between us and holding on to those things. The barrier of fear, like Abraham going down into Egypt. The barrier of relationship that had caused him to keep Lot in and around him. And there are many, many things that we can learn from Abraham's life. And I just pray that God helps us to see what we need to learn, not just about God, not just about Abraham, but how those things relate to us, and how we live, and what we do, and how we should live, and what we should do. And to know, as I said, that even when we get ourselves into a box situation, even when we don't know what to do, even when we're poking around at ways out of the mess that we're in, and maybe doing more damage by doing that than the words there, that God is still keeping his eye on us, he's still protecting us, he's still keeping things within limits, and he is still giving us that promise. That promise underpins. So it's not the Abrahamic promise. That covenant is now a covenant. We have a covenant of deliverance, of hope, of heaven. Not this earth, but of a future time. Let's turn to God in prayer. Lord, I pray that you would help us to know and to identify with the man and to men who made mistakes, just like us. And I pray that you would help us to learn what we can from those mistakes and apply them to our situations, not only to help ourselves, but to help others who made those same mistakes, who've come to love money more than relationships, who've wandered off into the wrong paths. Help us through your mercy, if we can, to help those people in those situations. I spoke to one earlier this week, and I pray that you help me to try and give whatever help I can to him and to the others, many others like him. We need a strong church. We need a church of people who are dedicated to you and following you and building and keeping altars, spiritual altars, in this place and at this time. For your name's sake, amen.